What is music? Music can be considered a lot of things, which is kind of the beauty of it all. The endless possibilities of artistic interpretations, forms of expression, reflection of a political environment, societal upbringing, culture. It is a really broad term that, if I was trying to restrict to certain elements of what music should contain, it would most likely close so many doors of discovering movements, cultures, and that cap would make discovery of music pretty stagnant. And yet I still think that I can broaden my horizons even more, that there is no end to it. After listening to a lot of music, I still don't get tired. One other thing that I've taken a fascination over the years is defining what is truly subjective and objective, to which I'd say that the whole discourse over what can be considered objectively music or not, and music opinions being totally subjective, is most likely the main thing that got me hooked into this subject matter. But I ended up taking it a step further, questioning whether we, as people, are able to define anything as objective. Here's my thesis when it comes to the subject. There are certain things that exist in our environment that we sense and make us feel a certain way that we would consider to be objectively true. This is communicated to us through language and words that are designed to be defined in a certain way. But what happens with the exceptions to those rules? What about colorblind people who see color in a different way than we define as objective? What if a group of people are tone deaf and experience music in a different way, or have tinnitus or an extra sensitivity to certain types of frequencies? In another set of examples, what about the numerous people that end up believing on flat earth or lizard people or are against science? What about religions in the constant attempt to prove God's existence? All of those elements which don't align with our perception of objective reality. Now mind you, I don't equate tone-deaf people to conspiracy theorists, but instead of instantly dismiss all of those exceptions as an anomaly, it proves that there are actually so many different factors to which a person interprets things, what is good or bad, or what is true or false, that we don't simply live in a bimodal system to which there is just one definitive answer over another one. It's almost as if every single person individually has actually a different idea over what can be considered subjective and objective, and certain groups of people can align and come to similar conclusions. So when we tend to talk about something being objectively right or wrong, for example, I think it's more complex than just have a definitive answer. And I want you to keep in mind that this is not coming from someone who is an expert on the topic of philosophy in the lens of epistemology or metaphysics. But from all directions philosophy goes to, this is definitely what I'm most interested at. I'm mentioning all of this not in order to flex any sort of divine knowledge that I gathered through reading philosophy, as if it opened my third eye or something. There are so many takes and points that I'm not going to be able to understand or articulate, and that's completely fine. I simply love to share what I'm passionate about, which brings me to this shit. For all of those years I'm on the internet, there's actually been a sphere that I've dedicated admittedly more time than I should, and that is drama content. It is a fascinating part of the internet that I haven't really taken that much of a part of. I've always been more of an observer, but ever since I've started becoming more and more vocal about my political stances, I was thinking of making a video to this vein for a while now. I thought of making a video of the deserving downfall of Finn McKenty, aka the punk rock MBA, but there has already been so much coverage that it would be like beating a dead horse at this point, and I would have nothing more to add. Although I have to say that the fact that the vast majority of content creators solely focused on his legitimacy, whether he liked music or not, and his grift, rather than his wife, the content she was known for, and the age gap between the two, and when they ended up meeting and dating, is preposterous. But here is a relatively big music YouTube channel who I haven't really seen people talk about as much, and it probably doesn't have much to do with his videos being perfect and having nothing to criticize them for, but most likely because he is such a laughingstock that no one wants to really engage with his content. So Become the Knight, who was also known as Mike the Music Snob, is a metal YouTube music channel whose most popular video is about why he hates Cardi B. You can see where this is going. This is not a video that is worth touching upon. You can say there are some valid criticisms about the allegations at the time and mainstream music industry as a whole, but to its core, it's just him getting mad at Cardi B lyrics. At least when Ben Shapiro did it, his whiny voice made it much more enjoyable. Here, it's just obnoxious. But Alpha27 don't instantly equate someone with right-wingers. Oh, don't worry, he said it himself. After not listening to his name in years, this coming out video came to my radar, which was being ridiculed and made fun of. Here's a brief summary of what I'm going to highlight from a video that did not need to be 17 minutes long. So he starts by stating how this video is not about politics and how he is not a conservative, he just aligns with some positions, and how the signs were always there, like his response to Adam Neely on his very interesting video about music theory and white supremacy, which to Mike's addition was not the most well-made response. Well, I can't judge it because that video does not exist anymore, as it seems. Now, I don't know if he deleted it prior to this video, after coming out, or just a month ago. Yeah, that is a pretty interesting final post. He also mentions how him speaking out has not really cost him any opportunities anyway. So why is anyone afraid to speak out? Which also begs the question, why does this video exist in the first place? Why are you portraying yourself as the victim of a minority that is meant to be silenced, that is pressured to have a political stance, when you proved yourself it didn't really affect you in any meaningful way? Like, you contradicted yourself. But I get it, it's about other people finding the courage to speak out, and the whole channel is meant to be about music and be civil and kind to each other. You know, the average liberal slope. Which goes on and on about cancel culture and how the left also eats itself. That's just the first half of the video. On the second half, he just talks about his story, his sense of morality, and the song he made. It's not really all that important. Which leads us to the latest video of Become the Night, which came out almost 4 months ago. And no, this is not the time it took me to make a response. I learned of this video's existence only a few days ago as I'm recording this. But ever since the What is Music video, he hasn't uploaded anything else, and the video has only gotten 11k views so far. Keep in mind, almost a 200,000 sub channel, making what he considers the best video he's ever made. And you might say, Alpha27, you are already getting into this with a predisposition bias. The video has not even started and you've already poisoned the well. Okay, I agree. Let's see how Become the Night decides to start his video.
Music objectively exists. When I said that, there were 3 different reactions in the audience. First is, why would you say something that everyone already agrees with? Second is, not really, because music is so subjective that anything you think is music counts as music, the most virgin version of a response. And the third was, based?
So basically, anything I was mentioning beforehand is automatically treated as a virgin response. That is an interesting way to decide and word your argument. Let's jump forward a minute, see what else he has to say.
Yes, I believe some things we call music are in fact not music.
Move this man!
So subjectivists, or in this case every subjectivist, are being shown as immature people who are not able to handle criticism. Off to a strong start. Let's jump a bit forward at the 4th minute mark.
I'm a believer that if we don't have a definition of music that distinguishes it from other types of sound, it inevitably will lead to a degradation of the art. This sounds very closed-minded and stodgy of you, Mike. Good. It sounds like you're trying to be a gatekeeper, Mike. Absolutely yes.
So Mike over here has portrayed himself as a gigachad for admitting to come into this discussion from a close-minded and gatekeeping perspective. Not the traits that would make me take your argument on music or in any other matter seriously. To his credit, he establishes from the very beginning this tough guy persona that has already poisoned the well 3 times in order to just have a specific group of people closer to an echo chamber sit down for the remainder of this video rather than trying to appeal to as many people as possible. So the video starts in a sort of hostile way, using objectivity as a shield that is immune to criticism, and if anyone dares to argue objectivity, is being called names, is being shown as immature, is being shown as a snowflake triggered by facts and logic, kind of like what we've seen with multiple right-wing grifters by other forms of media, primarily video games and movies. Now, I don't believe that Mike is a grifter or that he's not passionate about music. It's just that the video starts with some red flags and begs the question whether the audience that is meant for actually cares about music as a form of art. So I'd say these three clips sort of feel like bad faith criticism and have already poisoned the well. So wouldn't it be funny if later down the line Mike decides to ask for good faith arguments and be open to have his mind changed? Would he really contradict himself? Is this tough guy act just a facade? Or will he keep it up until the end? We'll see, but let's not jump too far ahead. Let's go back at the beginning.
This is Revolution 9 by the Beatles. It's the most experimental piece they've ever worked on, and I think it's fair to say most people don't really like it that much.
So the first example he cites as what can be considered really music is the Beatles with Revolution 9, to which he says with confidence most people won't like. So what if I told you that I consider Revolution 9 the greatest track out of the White Album? Hot take, bold choice, but what does that entail to you? Am I part of the anomaly that I stated previously? Was it a matter of perspective that you thought was not possible? He follows up with this.
I mean, can you blame them? It's chaotic, weird, uncomfortable. Definitely not the first thing people think of when they think music. And to be honest, I really don't think it is music.
Can music not come from a place of discomfort, chaos, and weirdness? Is music not supposed to make you feel that way? Are we disregarding the intent of music making you feel that way? Because to me, you perfectly described the effect of this piece with those three words. But apparently, this is not enough.
Revolution 9 is what was coined as a sound collage, or a composition of audio clips that are layered, manipulated, and arranged to create a new sound or effect. So, is a sound collage music just inherently? Is it automatically music? Well, things like old hip-hop sampling can qualify as sound collages, and I'd say, yeah, that stuff is music. But when I hear Revolution 9, it definitely doesn't remind me of hip-hop beats. It kind of reminds me more of noise.
Well, here's the thing. Hip-hop sampling contains elements such as rhythm and tempo and melodies, loops, stuff that usually comes to mind when we think of music in a technical sense, as opposed to sound collage, which is meant to feel like a collage, without necessarily relying on cohesion and other elements that we tend to associate with music. But old hip-hop would also consist of a ton of singles that would have the instrumental and a cappella version, with a separation of parts of what is perceived as a complete musical piece count as music to you, because if not, that would dismiss a massive part of hip-hop's history and culture. What is Revolution 9 on the White Album? Is it just a segment on a double album that happens not to be music? So does that discount the rest of the experience from the field of music, or is it just a moment that exists for some unexplained reason? How about the hidden tracks that could become the staple of the CD format in the 90s and the 2000s, and the massive gaps of complete silence? Why was that even a thing? What about interludes, intros and outros, skits from hip-hop albums? Does narrative storytelling not enhance the experience, communicate something, or is their existence just a mistake? And if we don't count this as music, in what category do we put them? Can there not be any coexistence between art mediums? Why would so many artists end up having so many non-musical pieces to their albums? You never bring this stuff up, and I'm sure that there are albums that you love, with an intro and an outro, that would not meet your criteria for music, and their absence would make for a less compelling experience. And if you really can't think of any album whose quality would worsen with the absence of intros, outros, or interludes, then I'm sorry if I sound like a prick, but you need to listen to more music or listen to certain albums again.
By the way, I'm not an absolutist on this. I'm open to being convinced that Revolution 9 is music.
Or remember what I said about this tough guy act? Yeah, it's already gone. And fun enough, this comes before the gatekeeping part. So what really is it? You have already alienated anyone willing to make an argument from the opening remarks. And you might say it's just a joke, don't look much into it, to which I'd say then why should I look more into the rest of the video then? Why include this? You could just open your video with your statement and your willingness to listen to other ideas. But that's not really what we got here, is it? And also, I am not a total subjectivist. There is value to discuss objectivity, but you don't seem to feel the same way, judging the way you started this video.
So, what does music mean? I asked Twitter that question and got a lot of impassioned and very different answers.
The problem is that all of these answers almost seem to be answering different questions. It's because the question itself is admittedly fairly poorly worded. It kind of almost sounds like I'm asking the question, what is music?
For those of you who watch a ton of music YouTube video essays, this question may seem like old hat and a stale premise. But from what I've seen, I don't think the importance of music and how we define it has been emphasized enough on these channels yet. My fellow YouTubers certainly talk about music with great passion, implying its importance. But at the same time, it feels like most of them are actually dancing around the topic.
Well, maybe that's because trying to be more direct and more specific would complicate things, be a disservice to the whole medium, and restrict it to fundamentals that would lead to the eradication of entire scenes and movements. I find it funny that he actually uses the Adam Neely video, What Does Music Mean, as an example, because the thumbnail just gives you the answer basically. A definitive answer is not a necessity, and this is the appeal not just with music, but any other sort of art medium. If only Mike could be satisfied with this answer, but this is not enough. There has to be something more specific that would satisfy his viewpoint on what we should consider music.
I really don't think we've gotten a good and satisfying definition for music to this day from anyone.
Here's the thing, we do have a definition of music. If you Google music definition, here's what it says. Vocal or instrumental sounds or both combined in such a way as to produce beauty of form, harmony, and expression of emotion. Also, we have here in which says what is the best definition of music, an art of sound in time that expresses ideas and emotions in significant forms through the elements of rhythm, melody, harmony, and color. We also have down here the 7 concepts of music: sound, rhythm, tempo, dynamics, melody, harmony, and texture. It might feel pretty vague, but this vagueness gives this artistic freedom. I like those definitions because I read this, and I don't feel like this doesn't apply to this obscure genre. But there is too much ambiguity, right, Mike? We need to be more restrictive about this. This is why you feel that other YouTubers dance around the subject, because otherwise they would see themselves erasing entire historically significant fields of music.
Someone telling me that my uneven load of laundry wobbling the washing machine or wobbling the dryer in such a way that it creates a rhythm and then telling me that's music sounds a bit like bullshit. As someone who has listened to shitloads of music and made music, no.
Here's a funny anecdote story. I love that he specifies an example with a washing machine, because back when I was in early elementary, like 7 or 8 years old, or even younger, I remember that I had an idea of recording an entire washing machine cycle and put it on an album as this one singular track. And I don't mean just take a sample and slice it, chop it, and loop it, but an unedited cycle. The ideal for me would be to capture all of the silent gaps without any sound of the environment being the background. So when this washing machine broke and we replaced it with another, I was disappointed it didn't have the sounds of the previous one. It was like a letdown for me, and it was something that I'd think about, that this particular washing machine would be irreplaceable untraceable for me, and I didn't have an audio recording of it. Also, I've listened to a lot and met music. Some of it are field recordings, and yeah, this is still music to me.
If you love music as much as you profess to, this is foundational to appreciating and protecting music. Why does it matter how we define music? I mean, we know what music is, right?
Number nine.
Yeah, do we know what music is? If you're concerned about maintaining the integrity of music and art in an age where AI is on the rise, and there are people in the industry far more concerned with money than truth, then defining what music is of the utmost importance. How can we protect and preserve something we can't even define? How do you know music is changing into something unrecognizable if you could never recognize it to begin with?
I'm with you that the rise of AI and corporate capitalist greed pose a danger to the music industry alongside any other artistic form. But what does this have to do with defining music? How would that change anything? And if anything, Revolution 9 is like a big fuck you to the music industry, its norms and its restrictions, which obviously they are not the first to do, but it was really like one of the first times you would see one of the biggest bands, if not the biggest at the time, to have such a bold statement in the 60s, one that I would argue expressed its themes in a more sharp way than any lyric Lennon has ever written about love and peace. Also, that framing and wording is very bizarre. Protect music from what? What would make music unrecognizable? Like, where did that come from?
If you don't have standards or parameters for what things are or aren't, how in the world can you make any claim about something being good or bad?
But something being good or bad are subjective terms. Also, does that mean that you should have an expertise on a subject for your judgment to be validated? Don't get me wrong, it helps being knowledgeable of what you're talking about. But again, very restrictive language.
This isn't music. This isn't music. And just because you want to decide in your head that these sounds magically are music, that doesn't magically turn them into music. This is music. This is music. I didn't have to tell you it was music. You immediately knew when it played that was music. That's because humans have musical intuition, an innate ability to identify and make music.
So the entire field of noise and nature recordings, well, it sucks if you have albums in your collection of this kind. Scrap all of it, put them elsewhere. It doesn't matter that you can find CDs or vinyl records with those types of sounds, all the labels that specify in noise and sound recordings. Let's put them out of the equation. If there is a group of people that is dedicated to go on music websites, it includes sounds of noise or wildlife in multiple genres and subgenres, it is being approved. If there is a section of labels dedicated to distribution of media about noise or wildlife, that's enough for me. And who am I to judge? If anything, this gives us opportunities to further explore the capabilities of the medium we love, broaden our horizons. I am not the arbiter of music, and so is no one else. What if the sounds of noise or the ducks were manipulated and used in the context of a rhythm with certain tempo or melody and did not tell you the source? Wouldn't be recognized to the human ear as music? But what if I told you that the beat you listen to right now is actually comprised of duck sounds? Would that dismiss its musical idea? Keep those examples in mind moving forward.
I've been working on a definition for music for a while now, and I think my definition is pretty great. I'm hoping this is the best definition of music that has ever existed, but I understand that one YouTuber isn't going to solve this gargantuan problem on his own.
Which is not really a problem, more like something you see as a problem and trying to convince us that it is a problem that we should care about.
So I asked you to please give my definition a chance for the duration of this video. And if by the end of the video you still disagree, please let me know in the comments why you disagree. I expect I'm going to have to evolve my positions over time on this. So, I mean, if you can help me understand the truth better, I would be very appreciative. And because this problem is so complex, my definition is a gigantic mouthful. It requires tons of explanation and qualification, so please bear that in mind.
Again, where's the tough guy from the beginning that is immune to arguments? What, are you not confident in your definition? That is not what I expected from you, Mike. But okay, let's not be bad faith here. Let's give his definition a chance, shall we?
Ordered, semantically ambiguous sound, organized through cognition, that conveys substantial, sophisticated, or transcendental emotion and meaning. This sound drives humans towards cognitive dissonance relief and synthesis, promoting social cohesion and conflict resolution via communicating an honest signal about the human condition that language and noise can't.
If this feels like a pretentious vomit of words being thrown together and seeing what sticks, well, he confirms it so himself.
Feels like every word in this definition requires its own video to even explain what the hell I'm talking about. Like, I kind of don't blame anyone who just checked out at that point. That was so pretentious, and I kind of want to slap myself saying this out loud.
To which it begs the question, why did you make it in the first place? If you don't feel that comfortable with what you wrote, and you need to explain every word in order to communicate your point, then work on it more. Don't publish it yet. Where's the confidence of the best music definition? Because you're not selling me on this. There's a good reason why definitions are not a mouthful, and if they would need further explaining than the word they try to define, then something is wrong. Simplified language that can be straight to the point is the essential part when having to define something. Definitions are not done by one person. That is not how the field works. It's reached by groups as a whole coming to a consensus and communicated in ways that can be applicable to as many people as possible. When I look at this, I cannot see how in any way a whole would come to a consensus as this becoming the new definition of music. And the thing is that while it's a mouthful, it's actually far more restrictive and specific than the broader simplified terms you can find with a simple Google search. Like, where do words like order and organized come from? This already closes the door to so many scenes and movements. Also, an honest signal communicated outside of noise and language. So what about spoken word and poetry? It feels more of like a list of exclusions, the anomalies that disturb the common idea of what music is supposed to be. It's more like an affirmative statement of what music should be, rather than a question of what music can be, and I don't find this to be a productive sentiment. Let's look at the first example which Mike decides to provide.
So the first example I'd like to start with is every video essayist's favorite piece, 433 by John Cage. Yep, this is it. Just sitting there like a jackass.
433 is like the music's version of the duct tape banana art piece, with people getting mad about how it's a sign of regression of modern art, with the artist proving the point of how fixated people get over what should be defined art. Same thing with the urinal piece of 1917. Guess what groups of people were mad at that, and what their political leanings were. 433 is like a litmus test at this point, and further proof why this whole discourse becomes meaningless. Obviously, you can tell that Mike doesn't consider this music, and then the tough guy Mike makes his appearance once again.
Now, someone who has trouble thinking for themselves might object, but Mike, an important part of the piece is the ambient sound. You're supposed to pay closer attention to your surroundings and focus on the ambience of existence. There is sound in the piece, and therefore, it's music. Right, in the world of non-bullshittery, we call that noise. The first word in my definition is order. Order is an essential quality for music to have. Inversely, noise is something we would describe as disordered or lacking order. The order is what makes music an art form.
This is why the general definition doesn't have the word order, because imagine actually thinking that order makes music and art work, dismissing anything improvised, or in this case, even ambient music is out of the equation. We are rewriting history at this point.
The ambient noise could have the potential to be musical, but not have substantial enough order to meet the standards of music. Musical order is a big topic that I will be touching on later in the video, especially when it comes to distinguishing music from musical.
Okay, so I guess not all hope is lost, guys. Something can be musical. Music might be a stretch, but musical? Yeah, that's more like it. Like, why are we complicating this? Is this the answer to anything that does not meet your criteria of music? We are calling them musical now? Is this a language reconstruction that I'm witnessing? What is going on here?
This isn't to say that 433 is useless or inherently bad. I mean, the piece directs its audience to take a moment in silence and be more aware of their surroundings, or even just find a moment of peace. That sentiment is more prescient today than ever before.
Now, to give credit where credit's due, I think that this is the first Mike W. I agree with that sentiment, and to me, this is all the piece needs. Like, you gave meaning to the piece's existence, which makes all of the previous rant completely pointless. All the rambling of whether it's technically music or not is meaningless. You yourself found the meaning. Why should there be desire of more to it, like on a technical standpoint?
And like I said, scientifically, we can measure the musical experience in the brain. I'd be willing to bet thousands of dollars if we did a controlled study of people listening to a 433, compared against literally any actual music. We would see a lack of music activity in the brain for those listening to silence. Maybe in a future video, I can talk about the science of music experience, but until then, we must continue on.
In case this video does happen, it would be interesting to contain tracks from the scene the 433 piece is a part of, which contains sounds, but you wouldn't consider music. So in case anyone only knows of 433, there is a scene that Mike completely dismissed and made no mention about. That is indeterminacy. While this term is mostly used in philosophy and science, in music, indeterminacy is a compositional approach in which elements of composition are left up to chance or to the interpreter's free choice. Also known as aleatoric music or chance music, one of the first and main examples was by John Cage with Imaginary Landscapes, the first one being composed back in 1939, and also Music of Changes composed in 1951, a solo piano work which uses the I Ching or I Ching, a classic Chinese text, for its application on sounds, durations, dynamics, tempo, and densities. It is a really fascinating idea that really pushes the boundaries of what we perceive as classical music, and of course other names that could be considered really revolutionary and significant in their compositions would be Karl Heinz Stockhausen and Morton Feldman. There is actually so much history surrounding a whole movement that was meant to challenge listeners with elements of composition that can be left up to your interpretation, and only citing 433 dismissing this entire relic of boundary-pushing historical pieces is a massive disservice to the subject you are supposedly so passionate about protecting its integrity, which makes me question where your interests would really lie.
Composition of 433 is defined by its absence of composition, or maybe even being very charitable, outsourcing the composition to happenstance, which makes me want to murder hippies.
Oh well, thanks for being charitable, I guess. Well, checkmate, he got me there, I guess. Such mature, level-headed arguments.
Music is created through intention. Yes, even improv, the nonsense side of free jazz. And even this weird-ass thing. Those are all still creation driven by intent.
Now I find the second one to be a funny example because it contains tempo and rhythm and melody. If you go back to a point you made at the 5th-minute mark, you said,
I didn't have to tell you it was music. You immediately knew when it played that that was music. That's because humans have musical intuition, an innate ability to identify and make music.
Wouldn't that apply here if someone just listened to it, But now that we have a video showing that these sounds are made by ordinary house objects, now it becomes a weird thing. So context now matters, it's not just the sound. You mean to tell me that there are other mediums in which artists and performers are communicating their intent? You contradicted yourself right here. I get it with the free jazz example as its improvised elements don't meet the criteria of your definition, but why did you show the second example? You just proved that you can make something sound like music with objects whose sounds were not meant for creating music. Like, did you not think this through?
In 1975, Lou Reed released an album called Metal Machine Music. That's it. That is what the entire album sounds like. You can listen to 10 seconds and know what to expect from the remaining hour of this record.
Guys, no one tell him about harsh noise wall. If he learns about artists playing the same walls of noise for hours without literally any change up, he will have an aneurysm.
As of now, I'm not completely settled on a position for this record. This album absolutely challenges music conventions more than any record I can think of. It's hard to know whether or not to call this music, and I think that was part of the intent of the piece. I lean heavily towards Metal Machine Music not being music, but before I explain why, I want you to know I am very open to hearing other opinions on this. If you have good arguments as to why you think it is music, please let me know in the comments down below. Even if I am wrong about this record not being music, it's a great example for demonstrating the concepts in my definition of music and musical.
Again, where does that sudden change of heart come from? No one would sit along and try to provide a solid argument to someone who started the video by admitting to being close-minded and poisoning the well. Did you record those parts in different days? What I will say is that the examples he is willing to provide are ones that he can't find context about, as if there needs to be some sort of explanation for an album like Metal Machine Music to exist. Otherwise, its creation is just a joke without an intent, so why make it in the first place? Which is not something I can get behind. Context matters, but do not let that be the driving force that pulls you back from publishing something. It doesn't need to be the most profound thing in the world. And if all you want is to make noise, then make some fucking noise.
ASMR is a great example of interesting or fascinating sounds that aren't music. It's relaxing. Sometimes it's more ordered than just random sound. We're coming back to the word order, I promise you. But we certainly wouldn't call it music, even though the sound can be pleasing. The sounds of ASMR do many times have meaning, but not the type of meaning we're evaluating for.
Wouldn't it be funny if ASMR was considered a genre of music? Oh wait, yeah, this is a thing. Now, in fairness, the field of music genres has gone to a point of having way too many labels, where it becomes hard to keep up with every new thing that can be considered a subgenre now. A main example would be the site Every Noise at Once, whose main genres and influences can be broken apart to so many subsections that you're gonna say you're bullshitting me here, there's no way this is a thing. And yet there's a platform for every niche and weirdly specific thing you can imagine. And I'm repeating myself, but really, who am I to judge? If there is the need for distinctions from one weirdly specific subgenre to another one, this should be not treated as an anomaly. And mind you, some of those distinctions might not come from a direct shift in music, but from elements such as origin. We have new wave of British heavy metal, Swedish death metal, US power metal, true Norwegian black metal. It might have to do with a time period, as we move from post-punk to post-punk revival, or even politics as we see in anarcho-punk and hatecore, and with radical anarchist black metal and national socialist black metal. It's almost as if there are other factors that need to be taken into account when digesting a piece of music, which might feel like they have no correlation, but those distinctions seem crucial enough in order to be made. Then there's a chunk about existential and transcendental meaning, which is whatever, and then he makes his definition on what is musical, and he says this.
So my definition for musical is experience of emotion through ordered, semantically ambiguous sound characteristics. You'll notice that these definitions are very similar, but they're not the same. That's because there are sounds that can be musical that are in fact not music. Instantly, I think of speech. Speech has an inherent musicality to it called prosody. Prosody provides emotional context to semantic information in speech to help us better understand what someone really means when they're saying something. There are also noises that can be musical, such as birdsong, police sirens. Speech and noise can have musical qualities to them, but they aren't music.
So what about all albums that are related to speech or spoken word, birdsong, sound effects? If we really go out of our way to make an entire different category to which certain conditions like this apply, then we are making an unnecessary complication of a formula that has already been established to work just fine in broadening our horizons and showcase the endless possibilities of the medium. It would also open a can of worms with more and more policing of what should be considered musical rather than music, kind of like a slippery slope where, yeah guys, it's just about only this exclusive example and then it's more and more examples and then we get devoid of all meaning and purpose.
Music is art, the harnessing of primarily musical aesthetics with intent to convey a substantially meaningful experience. And musical is the sensation, the stimulus in the brain. Something like a police siren or a clothes washer can produce a small musical response in the brain, but not be substantially ordered enough to qualify as music.
Again, I don't think it's necessary to repeat myself and point out why this is a ludicrous statement. Music is art, and yet art is restricted from a freedom of artistic expression to a requirement of a substantial meaning. Well, at least he's honest about being close-minded.
So this begs another question. What is musical order? Wait, Mike, you're saying that musical means something that has musical order. That's a circular definition.
Ladies and gentlemen, we got him.
Yes, we are at the most foundational layer of concepts where definitions start to become circular. This is a common problem in philosophy. Circular definitions are classified as a logical fallacy, but that's not always the case. In our case, it's a limitation of language versus experience.
I swear right-wingers did not give a shit about circular definition fallacies. They didn't even know it was a thing up until Matt Walsh dropped the documentary What is a Woman? And then every conservative debater would ask the question, and then as a gotcha would be like, but don't use the word woman, it would be a circular fallacy. What a timeline that was. Now, what if we took some of the claims he made at the beginning of this video and replaced the word music with woman?
I really don't think we've gotten a good and satisfying definition for music to this day from anyone.
I really don't think we've gotten a good and satisfying definition of what a woman is to this day from anyone.
How can we protect and preserve something we can't even define? How do you know music is changing into something unrecognizable if you could never recognize it to begin with?
How can we protect and preserve something we can't even define? How do you know womanhood is changing into something unrecognizable if you can never recognize it to begin with?
I'm a believer that if we don't have a definition of music that distinguishes it from other types of sound, it inevitably will lead to a degradation of the art.
I'm a believer that if we don't have a definition of a woman that distinguishes it from the other genders, it will inevitably lead to the degradation of the term. That sounds quite a lot like something Matt Walsh would say. You see why I have a problem with this rhetoric now? It reads so much like a propaganda tool. Now, this being his intent might be giving him too much credit. Whether it was intentional or not, in both cases it checks out on what I would expect a right-winger to do.
This pitch is A. And specifically A at a frequency of 440 hertz. Things like this rarely occur in nature, signaling us that there could be intent behind the sound. It also will begin to elicit an emotion that we'd describe closer to transcendence than, say, this.
Interesting that you bring up frequencies. If only there was a genre dedicated to sine wave frequencies. Oh, here it is, this is also a thing. So a big portion moving forward is about musical order, which to me sounds pretty similar to the 7 concepts we have for music, but sound, dynamics, and texture on their own seem to not really fit in his idea of musical order, since then it becomes noise, which is disordered. After the necessity to explain what he means with musical order, he goes back to see what elements apply with Metal Machine music.
Let's look at the opening track for some examples. We have sustained pitches, and the overtones coming from the guitar feedback are creating a certain kind of rich, atypical tonality. We have things that almost resemble a repeated melody, like a psychedelic ostinato. There's almost a Lydian modality to the harmony. Now, the rhythm doesn't appear to have any substantial structure to it, but that doesn't immediately disqualify it.
This is actually a pretty good and detailed way to describe certain elements that can be found on the first track, which comes as a contradiction to the sentiment he made that you can listen to 10 seconds of it and know what to expect for the remainder of the entire hour. You contradicted yourself here, Mike. Which one is it? Is it the same thing for its entirety, or there are other elements here as well?
Does Metal Machine music give the listener transcendence? To the vast majority of people, I would say absolutely not. However, there are some people, like I have evidence of this, who report after giving it some time to sink in, after getting acclimated to the music, they did feel transcendent while listening to this album. They found the experience highly immersive, which can be an important part of most music. I have no idea how, but I believe that they felt that way. I'm not just going to be like, oh, you're making it up, you're stupid, you don't know what you're talking. They probably felt that way. There's a very high likelihood.
Again, Mike decides to pick an example popular enough so that he can find evidence of a certain audience finding the experience immersive.
Music isn't the only sound art that's immersive. There's an entire field called sound design that revolves entirely around immersing the listener in mood and emotion through timbre. This stuff is awesome. It's immersive. Some might even describe the non-horror variety as transcendent. Some people might describe ASMR that I described earlier in the video as transcendent. Does that make horror sound design music? Does that make ASMR music? I would say definitely not.
Again, is the visual representation a necessity to transcend you with its dynamics and textures? What if you have an album whose soundscapes you don't know where they originate from? Can you not get immersed into a piece through curiosity, or is your viewpoint shattered when the sound source is not met by the criteria you've placed in your head? And you acknowledge the awesomeness of those stuff. Why can't they coexist with the art forms of music?
Metal Machine music really does sit squarely on the line between music and noise. If I had to go with my gut instinct, I would say absolutely not. This is not music. But I'm not the arbiter of what is and isn't music. There are people who've gotten emotional and cognitive benefit from this art. And yes, I will at least grant that it is art. I will give them that. So just because I don't understand it doesn't mean I can just dismiss their experience out of hand.
So second Mike W towards the end of the video acknowledging Metal Machine music as art, which again comes as a contradiction to the stodgy and gatekeeping attitude you embraced with confidence towards the beginning. So this begs the question of what is art to you, and what's the necessity of this distinction between art and music. If you think that your right-wing viewpoints are not being reflected to the rhetoric you are using towards music, you are sorely mistaken.
But I'm also a music professional with years of training and experience, and I've listened to way more kinds of music than I have ever cared to do. So I wouldn't say I lack an understanding of what music is.
And yet the only examples you were willing to provide are 2 songs and an album. What about entire movements, entire genres that did not make their appearance over here? What about music concrete and the works of Pierre Schaeffer, Pierre Henry, Yannis Xenakis, Bernard Parmigiani, Luke Ferrari, and many others, why would labels such as Recollection GRM go out of their way to repress those albums and preserve the history of such revolutionary artists if all it is just a bunch of noise that doesn't meet your automatic interpretation of what music should be? How about the Italian futurist movement, which, despite its ties to Italian fascism, with its works it provided some of the most significant recordings available and the very first piece of noise by Luigi Russolo back in 1913. What about sound effects, the nature recording subgenres such as whale sounds, insect sounds? What about radio broadcast recordings? What about beatboxing, jingles, mashups, brass and military, musical theater? There is so much history that is completely stripped away here. And I'm not a professional musician, unlike you, Mike, though it doesn't seem to really matter, as you admit to come into it from a gatekeeping and close-minded standpoint. Those were your words. Also, more kinds of music that you would ever care for. Why is that? Is the procedure of expanding your horizons like a chore to you?
This video hopefully has primed us to head into the next phases of this music objectivity series I'm going to be releasing, where we can begin evaluating whether music is good or bad. I know, taboo subject. There's so much more I wish I could have explained in this video, and I'll be making more videos to address those points I had glanced over.
So where are those videos? It's been over 4 months and nothing. Are you still working on them? Do they really need that much time to make? Or is it that you've realized you made a fool of yourself and abandoned the project? Was it the low traction? And what made you take the decision to private videos worth of 31 million views? Become the Knight feels like the type of person who would go into a modern art museum and complain that the abstractions it display are not real art, how it doesn't take any talent and anyone can make this, and call them art. While he is not explicit about the supposed degradation of music as an art form, this is what he's trying to communicate to you. To its credit, this video is well crafted and well edited, and you can tell it took a lot of time and effort to create. But it also doesn't feel like nothing more than a propaganda piece. The constant desire of preserving the foundation of certain pieces of art form compared to others is not only a non-existent problem that Mike wants us to see as a problem, but also a distraction from the actual root of evil, which is AI takeover and music industries relying on capitalist practices, revenue, advertising, trends, streams. Works such as Revolution 9, 433 and Metal Machine music, alongside with numerous scenes and movements which are meant to disrupt the status quo, are not the ones who degrade the art of music. They are the ones who keep the medium alive, and do not let anyone convince you otherwise. Any artist who loves the craft of creation would think of ways to push art forms to their limits or even go overboard. You will be surprised by how many ideas you think no one will attempt are actually already done. We've gotten to a point where original ideas are not really much of a thing, but that doesn't mean you should give up and strive for something original necessarily. That should incentivize you to be proud of your art, because there's going to be a community out there that is going to acknowledge your work for what it is. This is not an anomaly. These are not fields that we should erase or completely separate, because it's antithetical to the whole notion of freedom of expression. If by any means you found Mike's videos productive and helpful and motivated you to start your music genre, I'm not here to dismiss it. That's cool, but we can do better than that. So don't be afraid of not having talent or taking influences, and don't let anyone tell you what music should or should not be. I want more exceptions to the rules, broadened horizons, unless you're a fascist in favor of regimes that would strictly limit and censor the mediums you pretend you care of, in which case, what are you doing? Don't expect more videos like this in the future. Don't you worry, this is not a route I'm going into. I'm still going to talk about music and other forms of medium that I enjoy, and you can look forward to lots of different stuff I'm planning on making. I don't know if he is going to respond to this, and if he continues with the series and the future videos he's planning to do, I might not necessarily respond to them. This might be a video that flies out of the radar, or it might become one of my most well-known videos. I don't really care, I just had fun making this. If you come out of this video learning something new, a genre or an album that you were not aware of, and discovered something to your liking, this is more than enough for me. And this can only be achieved when we don't gatekeep music and we view it subjectively. Feel free to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Goodbye.